Shalom. We're continuing the study on monotheism and idolatry, or monotheism and the occult. The last lesson that we talked about was kind of a definition of what monotheism is. And I'm not going to repeat what I said in the last lessons, other than saying that the biggest battle, the biggest war that Judaism has waged over the centuries, I shouldn't even say Judaism, but the biblical battle of the centuries, of the millennia, has been the battle against idolatry. Idolatry among the nations, and sometimes, much to our regret, idolatry among our own people. And that's what the prophets, the classical prophets of the Old Testament, are battling, and the Psalms is battling, and our forefathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, are battling this battle with the world of idolatry. We haven't talked so much about the world of idolatry yet, but our plan is to talk about it in this lesson, to begin talking about it in this lesson. But before we do that, I just want to reiterate and return to the basic point. The faith in one God is what I would define in English as a holistic faith. A faith that looks at the big picture, looks at the whole picture, and doesn't divide it into smaller segments. The idols are essentially the worship of the forces of nature, or the seasons, or the sun, or the moon, or the heavenly host, or the sea and its powers. And there is no doubt that nature has power. However, worshiping one part of nation, or if you're an agricultural society, worshiping the prosperity of the harvest and the blessing of the harvest every season is logical, but it is idolatrous because it is a division of the very essence of the oneness and the wholeness, the perfection of God. Any time that we concentrate on one aspect of a person or one aspect of nature, and we develop a special admiration and also a praise of that special aspect, we are treading on thin ice as far as idolatry is concerned. The faith in one God is wise. Why is it wise? Because it looks at the whole picture and sees the relationships between the different elements, the different parts of the picture, and doesn't concentrate only on one force or one force of nature or one powerful event, but focuses on the source of everything rather than on the parts of everything. This battle of the Bible and of Judaism against idolatry, I would say, is the hallmark of the identity of biblical faith. And we had already talked about this a little bit in the previous lessons, but I want to just repeat that and do that before we enter into the dynamics of idolatry. The dynamics of idolatry, I think, is best described in this horrible event of building the golden calf in the wilderness. The children of Israel had left Egypt. They crossed the Red Sea. They saw the hands of God, opening the sea for them. They walked through dry land. The Egyptians with their chariots entered in the dry land, and the waves of the sea covered them and washed them away. After 50 days, Moses was up in the mountain talking to God, getting the revelation from God. And the people of Israel didn't know plan and the program, and they started getting antsy and impatient with Moses and with God. And I will read to you from the book of Exodus, chapter 32. We'll start reading from verse 1 through 4. And when the people saw that Moses delayed to come down out of the mountain, the people gathered themselves together unto Aaron and said to him, Up, make us gods, which shall go before us. For as for this Moses, the man that brought us up out of the land of Egypt, we wot not what is become of him. And Aaron said to them, Break off the golden earrings which are in the ears of your wives, of your sons, and of your daughters, and bring them unto me. And all the people brake off the golden earrings which were in their ears, and brought them unto Aaron. And he received them at their hand, and fashioned it with a graven tool, after he had made it a molten calf. And they said, These be thy gods, O Israel, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt. Let's analyze this text for a few minutes. The people didn't look at the whole picture, didn't remember what God did to the Egyptians with the 10 plagues, didn't remember the miracle of crossing the Red Sea. They lost confidence pretty quickly. They lost confidence from what they experienced just a short while before that. And they come to Aaron, the brother of Moses, and they say, I'm putting in my words, we're insecure. We don't know what happened to Moses. He went up the mountain. It's been 40 days and 40 nights and he has not come down, and he didn't even telephone or send us an SMS or an email. So we're insecure. We don't know what to do. Produce for us a God that will lead us. They lost their wisdom. They did not remember their recent history. They were insecure in the middle of the desert and didn't know how they're going to manage without some physical manifestation of God. So they came to Aaron and said, Make us a God. And this is the first essence of what idolatry is all about. It is a man-made God. A man-made God could be, taking the forces of nature and deifying them, and idolizing them, and worshiping them. And this is the essence of most of the idolatry of the world. Most of the idolatry of the world is an idolatry that worships the heavenly host, the sun, the moon, the stars, the forces of heaven, the lightning, the rain, the fertility that comes from the water that is coming down from heaven. In this case, these people had left Egypt. They were slaves in Egypt maybe for a little bit more than 200 years. Total time of their stay in Egypt was 430 years. But about half of that time they were slaves. Generations born into slavery with very little self-confidence. And they come to Aaron and they say, Make us a God that will lead us, because we don't know what happened to Moses. What do we learn to start with? That for them, Moses was like God. Moses for them was almost a divine figure, a divine leader. And we learn that from the event immediately after the crossing of the Red Sea in dry ground. In chapter 14, verse 31, it says, And they saw the great hand of God move, and they believed in God, and they believed in Moses, his servant. In other words, they equated the power of God with Moses, and just like they believe in God, they believed also in Moses. But when he didn't come down for 40 days and 40 nights, and they didn't know what was happening to him, they wanted a physical, man-made manifestation of the divine, of Moses. Coming from Egypt, one of the main gods of the Egyptian was the calf. The calf represented the goddess Hathor. The Egyptian goddess Hathor was represented by the calf, and she was one of the main goddesses of Egypt. She was the goddess of wisdom and the goddess of fertility and the goddess of the flooding of the Nile. The Nile flooded opposite the normal expectation of nature. When do rivers flood normally? They flood in the rainy season. In the winter, in the northern hemisphere, they flood in the winter, and probably in the southern hemisphere, they also flood in the winter. When the rain falls in the mountains, the rivers flood. The Nile is very interesting because it crosses from deep in the southern hemisphere into the northern hemisphere and spills into the Mediterranean. But it starts way down below Lake Victoria in Africa. When it is summer in the northern hemisphere, it's winter in the southern hemisphere. It's the rainy season. And the rain falls on the mountains of Ethiopia, Mount of Kenya, falls down further south, and the Nile flows from south to north. So it gets to Egypt at the height of summer, when everything is dry and there is no rain. That's what made Egypt such a rich country, because in the summer is when they had everything green because of the overflowing of the Nile. So Hathor was the goddess that was represented by the golden calf. And Aaron, the brother of Moses, demands from the people something that would be considered outrageous in the ancient world. He demands the women and everybody to take off their gold, the golden earrings and the gold that they were wearing, and contributed for the making of the golden calf. Now the rabbis very interestingly say that Aaron didn't really want to make the golden calf. He didn't really want to make them an idol. So he asked from them something that was outrageous, something that normally women refuse to do. Tell your women to take off their earrings and their gold jewelry and give it. He was hoping that they will refuse to do it and he won't have to make an idol. But they did it. They did it. They brought their gold. They brought their gold and they handed it to Aaron, and he fashioned it with a graving tool. And after he had made it a molten calf, they said, "These be thy God, O Israel, which brought thee out of the land of Egypt." In other words, they made an Egyptian goddess, the golden calf, something that they were already familiar with when they were slaves in Egypt. And they gave it the credit of taking them out of the land of Egypt. In essence, this is the height, I would say in Hebrew, the chutzpah of idolatry, the brass face of idolatry, the shamelessness of idolatry. They had just seen the hand of God in coming out of Egypt with an upright hand, with the riches of Egypt. And they now, out of the lack of confidence in God and in Moses, were settling down for a man-made Egyptian God. You would say, how could such a wise nation be so stupid? But this is the difference between idolatry and monotheism. Monotheism banks on the wisdom of man, of the ability of man to see the whole picture, to see the ecological working of all the systems together to produce the life, the growth, the fertility, the blessings of God in this planet called Earth. Idolatry concentrates on the partial details, this detail or that detail, and doesn't see the whole picture that is found only in God. So faith in one God is based on the ability of man to be wise, to look at the whole picture, to weigh all the evidence, to look at the intertwining working together of all the elements together to produce our life here on this planet. Whereas idolatry is a result of our fears, of our lack of confidence, and out of the desire to find something material on which we can either blame or bless or lean to take the responsibility off of ourselves. I will in the next lesson read in the continuation of chapter 32 of Exodus, the retelling of the story by Aaron after Moses returns and sees that they're worshiping the golden calf. How did Aaron explain what had happened? And we will learn more from that in the next teaching. May God bless you, and tune up again to our next lesson on monotheism and idolatry and the occult.